My name is Kimberly Cato, and I'm the registered psychotherapist and CEO of True Roots Counselling Services, where we purpose to come alongside people who are overwhelmed and perhaps blindsided by life altering circumstances and give them tools and strategies designed to help them, you know, transform their trauma into triumph.
Our next panelist, Genelle Levy, a writer and journalist who focuses on social inequality and social issues within pop culture. She has written about mental health for Viacom's Logo, Conde Nast's Them, Flair Magazine, and HelloGiggles.com. Genelle is passionate about advocating for equality on and off the page. Her work has also appeared in USA Today, Global News, TeenVogue, and Shondaland.com, amongst other places. Welcome, Genelle.
Thank you for having me.
Genelle, Nikki, do you, either one of you, have anything that you want to share, or do we want to pass over?
I'll share quickly. I just want to say that one of the reasons I've always been interested in covering mental health is because it often intersects with my work of covering social inequality as a journalist. One of the things that I've learned is that often mental health never really just stands alone. The stigma of mental health can prevent people from accessing healthcare that they need. Also, when people experience particular discrimination, they're often prone to developing anxiety or PTSD. And so, all of that, we can never separate that from social inequality. And I think that's important to note, especially within the Black community. And I will just say, on a personal level, it's also something I relate to as I also live with a mental health condition.
Thank you so much for sharing. And you're exactly right. Yeah, the intersectionality of um, mental health, particularly within the Black community, um, and the shame that then causes us to remain silent and stuck in silos instead of accessing services and resources that may be, though inadequately available, they are available should we have the strength and the ability to ask. But there's so many layers and barriers to us stepping out and asking for those resources. Um, and so, yeah, I appreciate what you had to share about that.
I
But I
just,
appreciate that. Oops.
oh, sorry, I just wanted to jump in and share. I agree with everyone here in the sense that getting rid of shame is a journey. I think one of the things that I often think about is that when there's shame, that's really what takes away our power. I think, especially thinking about that as Black people, even when we were enslaved, part of what they were doing was not only enslaving us, but also trying to, shame us, degrade us. And so shame is really taking away our freedom in a way. I think for me, how I personally worked through it is representation is huge for me. So realizing that there are other people out there who struggle with mental health, that I'm not alone in it. For me, even as a young person, seeing celebrities speak out, people who I admire, having friends who are sharing their experiences on Mental Health Day, I think even tools like social media, although social media can be a double-edged sword, I also think it is a platform for sharing. And that on certain days, like Mental Health Days or in October, when people are sharing their experiences, I think those are some things that can make us feel less alone. And I think that's the biggest part of shame. Once you realize you're not alone in it, oftentimes that's the first step.
Can you confirm for me
When you
verbally?
look at the historical
Can you guys hear this and see it?
Yes,
Yeah.
can hear. Yeah, coming through.
Yes.
Excellent.
experience of African Americans in the United States, you have to start with the experience of slavery and the vestiges of slavery in terms of the trauma associated with it. And I think that blacks continue to experience trauma in certain ways, and certainly with respect to those who live in urban communities that are infested with drugs or that are particularly violent. Those are traumatic situations that they experience on a daily basis. Certainly, as we've seen in recent events, interactions with the police can be, again, particularly traumatic. So when you talk about mental illness in the Black community, I think you have to begin with the experience of trauma and how trauma continues to abound in their experiences and in their daily lives. I think that what happens for a lot of individuals is that they suffer in silence with respect to having a mental illness. And so what I mean by that, in the greater society, there's certainly a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. It's sort of antithetical to the American ethic, which is to, be strong and courageous, to pull yourself up by the bootstrap, to weather the storm, etc. I think the second part of that, point is what's happening at the community level or the society level. And I think what happens is that within the Black community, I think that, again, that ethic about what it means to be strong and courageous is particularly pronounced because of trying to, combat those forces like discrimination or racism. And, it just adds to the burden of, sort of what it means to survive. And so then the person who's struggling with the mental illness is perhaps not embraced or, warmly accepted because of their struggles. I remember as a young person growing up, I used to hear about the person who was quote unquote sent down south. I used to wonder what that meant. And it wasn't until I got older that I became, more knowledgeable of the fact that that person was struggling with a mental illness or perhaps substance abuse. From a historical perspective, there's been a lot of emphasis in the Black community, particularly in Black families, on keeping your problems close to the vest in the home. You don't share what's going on with outsiders. No one can treat you as best as your family can. You bring all your burdens and your problems to your family. And if you do take it to any entity outside of your family, it's the Black church. The church is really important in the Black community. Make no mistake about it. It's a source of, sort of salvation and healing, and there's the whole collective support from, you get from your fellow churchgoers and that sort of thing. But I think also what has historically happened is that the church has been defined as the place to, sort of relieve your symptoms or to address your burdens. And so it stops there. And what I think needs to happen is that, first of all, I think pastors and lay ministers can be more trained in the signs and presentations of mental illness. But I think that the church could be sort of a triage unit, if you will, such that it identifies those who have needs, and it's that sort of first step and the sort of entree into care, but it shouldn't stop there. I believe that culturally competent care is critical to everything. If patients perceive that providers are inauthentic and do not care about their unique circumstances, then they're likely to be turned off. As a baseline, providers should understand the history of their neighborhoods, for example, or the history of the experience of of African Americans and Latinos, such that they can put the clinical presentation into context and understand what unique factors are in play with respect to the clinical presentation and how that person is seeking to, survive and live in the world as an African American or Latino. And so I think that the onus is on the provider to understand that context and to understand what it means for that person to live in that context.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump over to our panel and ask, how does trauma, silence, being strong impact, or how has it impacted you? And or what is your response to the video that we just watched?
I'd like to respond to the video that we just watched. I completely agree with the points that he was making. And I also wanted to bring up something from some of my own work, which is that shame and particularly stigma with mental health can actually lead to death in the Black community. So a story I worked on in 2017 found that for gay Black men, they're more likely to die from HIV and AIDS. And it's not because of anything biological. It's because the stigma of mental health, of even being gay in the first place or being out, makes people not want to access healthcare, which in America is already very expensive. And so it's all of those barriers coming together all the time. And psychology researchers at the New York University have actually given a name to this. I wish I could remember. I think it's called the multiple, it actually draws on this theory of intersectionality, which is basically just that because we can experience multiple discriminations at the same time, they gave a different name to it. We experience a very specific kind of mental disorder that draws from experiencing possibly homophobia, racism, sexism at the same time.
Yeah.
Someone just said multiple minority stress. That was exactly
that's right. Yes. Oddly enough, I was chaplain for about 14 years in Toronto, working with the HIV/AIDS community, and really genuinely was drawn into it because the organization that I was working with was actually founded based on a gentleman who stumbled into the church, who was completely estranged from his family and loved ones, and struggling for identity. Well, actually really struggling for connection as a result of the fact that he was gay. The family had just completely stepped away from him, and even in death wouldn't acknowledge him. And so this church wrapped themselves around him and established a hospice in his name and in his honor. And so I can genuinely relate to what you're saying about the suffering and the loss and the alienation that so many of our people have had to endure because their mental health, their life experience, and their issues have such stigma attached that they're not reaching out for the help that they, and if they do, they're ostracized. And so, yeah, I can relate to that. Thank you very much for sharing that.